Hello everyone and welcome back to Miss Key's Classroom. My name is Rachel and in today's video I am going to be talking about unit planning and lesson planning. I have been promising this video for a long time and I've had quite a few people request it, but it's school holidays here at the moment, so I'm finally getting around to sitting down and filming it for you. So yeah, in today's video I'll be taking you through everything to do with unit planning and lesson planning as a high school teacher. So if you yourself are a high school teacher, or maybe you are studying to become a high school teacher, this video will hopefully have lots in it for you and will hopefully have some useful tips and tricks for unit planning and lesson planning. Let's get straight into it. Alright, so let's talk lesson planning and unit planning. There are so many different ways and methods of lesson planning and unit planning, and there's so many templates out there and all those sorts of things. But the templates that I'll be sharing with you today actually come from a resource which is available on my Teachers Pay Teachers. It's totally free and it's from my lesson and unit planning pack, which I created last year because I remember when I was at uni and in my first year of teaching, I really struggled with lesson planning and unit planning because no one really teaches you how to do it. You sort of have one subject on it maybe at uni, and then you sort of have to pick it up when you're on placement. And so I created this planning pack, which is a sort of step-by-step guide of how to unit plan and lesson plan. So if you're interested, go and grab that one because I'll be using those templates today. So if you have those, you might find this video a bit easier to follow along with. In saying that, they are definitely not necessary to have. If you've got your own templates which you find work for you, grab those as well, because hopefully the tips and tricks that I talk about will be able to apply to various different templates. Okay, so now you've got your templates. Which do you begin with? Do you begin with the lesson plans or do you begin with the unit plan? Well, for me, I personally like to begin with the unit plan because I view that as sort of like the big overall picture of what you're going to be teaching. And I find it really hard to plan individual lessons when I haven't sort of mapped out my unit and worked out how many weeks I've actually got to teach this unit and therefore how many lessons. So I'm going to begin with the unit plan today and taking you through how I do that to begin with. So the first step of unit planning is to work out how many lessons you've actually got to teach this unit. So I like to work off maybe 4 or 5 weeks for a unit if I'm looking in a high school setting. Most subjects teach units for around about that long, but for you it might be different. Maybe you're only teaching a unit for 3 weeks, or maybe you've got a massive unit that you're going to teach for 8 weeks. So that's the first thing you need to work out, is how long is this unit going to go for? Once I've worked that out, I can add additional rows on my template if needed, or I can also remove them as well. So the next thing I do is I actually start right at the end of my unit with the day that the students would be submitting their assessment task. So I sort of like to work backwards when I'm unit planning. So I go ahead and I fill in the assessment task due date. Then I'll work out, okay, well, how many weeks would I need students to be working on this task? If it's a big task, they might need multiple lessons or multiple weeks. If it's a bit of a shorter task, maybe they only need 1 or 2 lessons. And so I like to go ahead and I fill in how long I'd like students to be working on this task. For the particular unit that I'm creating for today, we are going to be writing an essay. This is for Year 8 History. And so this is the first time the students will have written an essay. And so they will need ample amount of time to work on this. So I'm going to allocate about 2 weeks for them to write this essay. So now that I've filled in when my assessment task is going to be, it's really easy to see how many lessons I've actually got to plan content for, because a lot of those assessment task lessons are going to be allocated to working on the assessment task. So all the lessons before that are going to be content lessons. So with my unit plans, I like to plan for 2 lessons per week, just because that fits into the timetable with the school that I'm at. But maybe at your school you have 3 or 4 lessons a week, or maybe you only have 1 lesson if it's a shorter subject or something like that. So work out how many lessons you need to plan for per week. So you don't actually have to break each week into lessons. I prefer to do that though, just because I find it easier to sort of get my head around which content I'm going to be teaching in which lesson. I've seen other people on unit plans just sort of do an overview of the week. That might work really well for you. So if you think, okay, I'm just going to write a very brief overview of the topic we'll be covering in this week, go ahead and do that. I just prefer to break it down a little bit further into the lessons so that I can make sure I'm allocating enough time to all the content, I suppose. So as you can see, I've got my 2 lessons per week ready to fill in as we go along. Okay, so we've worked out the number of content lessons we have, but what on earth are we meant to be teaching in these content lessons? How are we supposed to know? It can be really tricky when you are first starting out as a teacher, or maybe if you're starting to teach a subject or a topic that you've never taught before. It can be really difficult to work out what on earth you're supposed to actually teach in these content lessons. If you're a teacher in Australia, my number 1 place that I would recommend you check out is the ACARA website. So this is the website for the Australian curriculum which all schools in Australia teach. And so I would suggest you go on there and you find your year level and your subject. So for me, I am teaching Year 8 history, so I'm going to go to that page on the website. So as you can see, for each individual year level and subject, there is heaps and heaps of information, and it's a little bit hard to work out what on earth you're supposed to be looking at now that you've finally got onto the website. Well, the bit that we are interested in is the historical knowledge and understanding. So this just applies for history, but it works for each subject. So there will be a part that says what the students are meant to have knowledge and understanding of by the end of that particular year level. So I'm just going to show you that now. As you can see, there is the overview of the ancient to modern world. Then we can scroll down and then there's something called depth studies. And so it's all broken into little sections. So we've got Renaissance Italy, we've got the Vikings, medieval Europe. And so those depth studies, they are part of what we are supposed to be focusing on in history in Year 8. So as you can see, each of them is broken down and it says the different sort of areas you're supposed to be focusing on. So if we're looking at medieval Europe, it says here that we are supposed to cover the way of life in medieval Europe. So looking at social, cultural, economic and political features and the roles and relationships of different groups in society. So that sort of gives us a bit more of an idea of what on earth we're supposed to be covering and how we can structure our content lessons to be able to touch on the things that the Australian curriculum says that we need to. This unit that I am planning for is for teaching the Black Death, so the plague that hit during medieval Europe. So I'm going to scroll down until I find the part in ACARA which talks about the Black Death. So as you can see here, I found the part that says the Black Death in Asia, Europe and Africa. And it's got 4 different things that I'm supposed to cover when I am teaching the Black Death. All the things from living conditions to the role of expanding trade, and then all the way down to immediate and long-term effects of the Black Death on Asian, European and African populations. So then while I'm on the Australian Curriculum website, if I go to elaborations as well under each of these sort of focus sections, it gives me even more details about what I could be covering. And so it's got those for each of the sections of each topic for Year 8 history. So there is so much information on the Australian Curriculum website that I could be looking at. So there's lots to cover, but at least we have a bit more of an idea of what we can be talking about in our content lessons and what we're actually meant to be teaching. So now that I've got this information, I can work out, okay, I've got this many content lessons. So maybe I've got 6 content lessons that I need to plan for. Maybe I can work out, all right, I think my students are going to be really interested in this aspect of the Black Death. Maybe it's the causes of the Black Death. And so I might allocate 1 or 2 lessons to focusing on that. Then, because I need to teach about the long-term effects, and I think that's really important when looking at the Black Death, maybe I'll allocate 1 or 2 lessons to that as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through and write down very briefly the sort of topic overview of each of my lessons within my unit plan. Then we're going to get on to maybe doing a few activities as well. So I have written in the very brief topic overview of each of my lessons. And so now I can go on to working out, okay, well, how do I actually want to teach this? Are we just going to be looking at PowerPoints? Are we going to watch a video? Are we going to do a worksheet? And so the way I like to do that is I go through the resources that I've already got. I actually taught Black Death last year. I didn't make a unit plan for it, but I've actually got so many resources for it already. If you don't have resources for the topic you are teaching though, I highly recommend going on to Teachers Pay Teachers and seeing if someone else has made resources for the topic you are teaching. Heaps of the resources are really affordable, and some of them are even free as well. So that's an excellent place to look. But also chat to other people at your school. Maybe there's someone at your school who's been there for years and has taught Year 8 history 20 years in a row or something like that. They're going to have so many resources. So get in touch with people at your school, see who's teaching the same topic as you or the same unit as you, and see if anyone has resources that they would be willing to share. So I've looked through all of my resources and I've kind of worked out how I'm going to teach each of the topics that I'm going to cover. And so what I'm going to do in the class activity and teaching strategies section, I'm just going to briefly write down what I'm going to do in each lesson. So for example, maybe I've got a PowerPoint that I'm going to use, or maybe I've got a Black Death video or something like that. So I'm just going to go through and write those all in now. If any of those are actual resources, so maybe links to videos or something like that, I will paste them into the resources column on my unit plan, and then I'll also just write down if there's any sort of resources that I know I've got stored on my laptop. I will write them in the resources section as well, so I know which resource I'm actually talking about when I write it down in there. Okay, so up until this point, my unit plan is pretty much done. Remember, a unit plan is just meant to be an overview of what you're teaching, and if I have learned anything in my 3 years of teaching so far, it's that things always change. And so you might have the best laid out unit plan, but then you work out that midway through the unit, your students are really loving learning about one aspect of the topic that you're teaching. And so you choose to focus on that, and maybe a few of your content lessons get collapsed into one or something like that. And so remember that this unit plan is just an overview and it can change. One other thing that I like to do with my unit plans as well is, as I am teaching, I go back into my unit plan and I add in any details. So maybe as I was teaching, I was looking for a different video in the end and I found an even better one than the one I'd planned to originally use. And so I'll go ahead and I'll put that in the unit plan as well, so that if I ever do teach this again in the future, I can just pick it up and say, oh, okay, I remember that video, that was really great, I'm glad I've got the link to it here, or else I would have forgotten about it. And so as I'm actually teaching, it's sort of like a running unit plan in that I add to it and I change things so that if I do teach it again, it's there, it's ready to go, and I can keep adapting it each year that I teach it. Okay, so our unit plan is done for now. It's time to move on to lesson planning. So when I was at uni on my placements and in my first year of teaching, I used lesson plans a lot. I think that lesson plans are a really good way of teaching yourself how to properly sequence a lesson, how to properly time a lesson, and how to set really good lesson objectives. And so if you aren't lesson planning and you are starting out as a teacher, or maybe you're at uni, definitely give it a go. I think for uni students anyway, when you're on placement, it's a requirement of most unis now that you are lesson planning. So yeah, if you don't have a template, the link to mine is in the description below. So yeah, let's get straight into lesson planning. So this is my lesson plan template. As you can see up the top, we've got space for you to fill in the term, the week, the subject, and the date of the lesson. Some of these details you might not know yet, but definitely go ahead and fill in the ones that you do. Then as we come down here, you can see we've got lesson objectives. So that's space for you to write in what the goal of your lesson is. What do you want students to have achieved by the end of this lesson? Then there's space for the resources. You can just copy and paste that little section directly across from your unit plan. Then as we come down here, we've got the actual lesson outline. This column here, the time/number of minutes, is probably the most important column in this whole lesson plan, because when you are teaching, it can be really easy to lose track of time, and before you know it, you've spent half an hour having a class discussion which really wasn't relevant to what you were supposed to be teaching anyway. And so writing in the time that you're meant to be teaching this particular activity, so maybe if your lesson starts at 11 o'clock, you can write in the first column 11 to 11:10 you are going to be doing intro to the lesson or something like that. Then I also write down how many minutes that actually is as well, because if you don't have a watch on you or a clock in the classroom to know that, okay, I'm spending roughly 10 minutes on this, it can just help you keep track of where you're meant to be up to in your lesson. So if you aren't writing down the times and the minutes that you are meant to be teaching an activity for, definitely give it a go. Again, like I said, this part can be really helpful with sequencing and timing your lesson correctly, because as we all know, we might have a million things that we want to teach our students, but at the end of the day, we only get to teach them 10 of those things. And so timing your lesson correctly can allow you to get through as much content as you possibly can while allocating enough time to the things that you really want to focus in on. So the next column over, we have lesson activity, and that is where you would be writing down what activity you are doing. So maybe it's having a class discussion, maybe it's watching a video, maybe the students are doing a worksheet, maybe you're going outside and you're looking at something. Whatever it is, write it down in that column there. Try and give as much detail as you can as well. So maybe if you're doing a PowerPoint, you might not be looking at all the slides in the PowerPoint all at once. Maybe you're just looking at slides 1 to 5. So make sure you write that down in your lesson plan, because when you're in the throes of actually delivering the lesson, you can easily lose track of where you're meant to be up to. And so write down as much details as you possibly can in that lesson activity column. All right, next up we have the second most important section of my lesson plan template, which is the backup plan. If you've been teaching for a while, you will know that things do not always go to plan as a teacher, and sometimes your lessons go completely off track, or maybe the internet isn't working, or maybe you forgot to print off that worksheet you were going to use, and so you've got to think of something else to be able to do. So in this little section, I like to write down what might I do if something goes wrong. So the most common things that go wrong in lessons are 1, your lesson finishes way early, or 2, your lesson goes way over time. So I like to write in what my plan would be if either of those things happened. So if my lesson finishes early, what am I going to get the students to do? Because you can't just leave them sitting there for the last 10 minutes of the lesson. What are you going to have as your backup to be able to fill in that time before the end of the lesson? Alternatively, if your lesson runs over time, what are you going to cut out of future lessons to be able to fit in all the content that you were meant to cover in this lesson, but that you haven't been able to? So keeping things in mind for when maybe your lesson doesn't go to plan, having that extra plan behind you, that backup plan, is really effective. So if you haven't set yourself backup plans before, I highly recommend it. Then the last little box we've got is homework. Often I don't set my middle school students homework, but maybe you want to. So I like to write down the homework that I'm setting students as well, because often if I don't write it down, I forget to tell the students. So write down the homework that you'd like the students to do as well. So for my Black Death unit, I'm not going to write out full lesson plans because I don't actually use them anymore, but I want to show you what a finished lesson plan might look like. So this is a lesson plan on film techniques. And so as you can see, I've filled in my lesson objective up here. Then coming down, I've got all my resources in there as well. Then I've got my lesson outline here. So then as you can see, I've planned out the rest of my activities. We've got things like silent reading, and then we've got a PowerPoint. Then we've got a definitions worksheet. Then as you can see on the next page, I've got my backup plan clearly set here for what I'm going to do if there's extra time or if the lesson runs over. Maybe if my PowerPoint or my projector or my laptop doesn't work, it does happen. And then what if the students finish early as well? So there you have it. That is how we do our lesson plans. So what I would do is I would look at my unit plan, I'd work out the first week of lessons, and then I would just lesson plan for the first couple of lessons of that unit. because like I said before, things change and maybe we come up with an excellent idea and we want to change it in our unit. And so we don't want to waste time planning for lessons that we're actually not going to end up teaching. So I just plan for the first couple of lessons in my unit plan, and then I sort of do the next week's lessons maybe on the weekend or on the day before or something like that. So make sure you're planned, but don't plan too much because like I said, plans change and you don't want to waste your time planning for things that you're not actually going to teach. Okay, so our unit plan is done and our lesson plans are done. So now you're all ready to go off and teach. If you have any questions though, please leave me a comment below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. But for now, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and I'll see you all very soon in my next video. Bye!